pleasure to see so many people here tonight, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing Ehryn Torrell talk about her work. And it's just a pleasure to host you in Dellasposa, and pass you to this.
Hi everybody, I'm Jessica McBride. I'm the co-director of Dellasposa Gallery, as is Julian Phillimore. I forgot to mention anything. I'm really pleased that you're all able to make the journey to our gallery this evening and to hear Ehryn Torrell talk about her work. Really, the inspiration of this exhibition, The Future is Female, has been a long time coming in general, but also from personal experience, which I'm sure many of you can identify with. For centuries, women have been sort of overlooked or underrepresented and undervalued in the art world, and I really think time is up. There's been numerous reports that have come out with the hard facts and data, saying that only 35% of works at the Tate Modern, a contemporary museum, are showing works by women. Some 4% of works in the museums in Scotland are works by women. The very top end of the art market at the auction house is 0.03% of works sold at auction are work by women. And the data goes on and on. So I think it's time that we readdress this gender imbalance and start making a difference. When I opened the gallery, I was acutely aware of having a platform to make a change, and that's something I sincerely believe in. I know myself kind of studying art history at university, and then breaking into the art world and trying to make a career out of it, how hard it is for women to sort of move their way up the career ladder. And I think it's the same for artists, women artists, and that we have to do something about it. So yeah, it's a big responsibility, but I think we can do it, and we can start having the conversations about what do we do. I mean, is there a quota system, is there not? I think it's sort of irrelevant. We just need to be having the conversations and trying to be more conscious of what we do as curators and what sort of exhibitions we do and what sort of conversations we have about art. I can go on and on about all the sort of conversations I've had since opening this exhibition and what people's opinions are. But I'm very pleased to be showing these 4 artists' work in this exhibition. Alicia Paz, whose work is in the front room, Ehryn Torrell, who of course you're all here for tonight, Gary Lolding and Tiny Lonsdale. Each artist explores the subject of womanhood, women's place in the world in their work, from a sort of individual subjective point of view, but also in a way that speaks to has a universal message, which I think is really important. And when I first came across Ehryn Torrell's work last year, I visited her studio and was absolutely blown away by the depth of knowledge, the substance of her work, and also the incredible sort of innovative things that she's producing. So it really was a sort of an honour to be showing her work in this exhibition, and I'm very pleased that you're all here tonight to hear her talk about it. This evening will also be sort of very conversational in style, so any questions you do have, please don't hold back. This is, art is a conversation, and so let's all, don't be afraid to talk.
Without further ado.
Thanks everyone, it's so wonderful to be here with you all, and thanks Julian and Jessica for the invitation to do the show and the invitation to have dialogue about my work in a studio environment and then in an exhibition, and to be here with you all today, which is really, really fantastic. It's nice to see so many people that I know, and some new faces and people I've known for a long time. It's really just such a pleasure to be here with you sharing this. Thank you. So I guess I could start by talking about a lot of different things. I just gave a talk at the University of Brighton last week. It's something I've been doing a lot the last couple of years, is guest lecturing at art schools. And it's always interesting to talk a little bit about where you've come from when you start an artist talk. And so I'm from Canada, and I've sort of noticed, I guess, this year that I've spent half my career now in England and half of it in Canada, which sort of blew my mind. So like, wow, already, 18 years, 9 and 9. which is really exciting. So I studied art and English literature in the into the late 90s, into 2000, at McMaster University, which is like a kind of steel town outside of Toronto. And it was really interesting to actually have gone to a university that was quite well known as an engineering school and a science school and a medical school, and study art, because obviously the art program was really tiny and people were like, we have an art program? But what was really brilliant about the school actually is that they did have quite an interdisciplinary approach. So I, as someone who doesn't quite like to make choices, could study multiple things. So I did a degree in English literature as well as art, which I wouldn't come to realize and value until, in a way, the mid-2000s, when art, at least as a young artist, I realized how professional you needed to be, how many things you needed to write about, how you needed to present yourself. This was prior to social media, but getting grants, convincing people to work with you, having meetings, having that English degree and that knowledge of how to speak to the context. I'm really grateful for that, having had that. And then I took a few years off in the early 2000s to make art. Not a few years off, I mean from school to be an artist. I moved to Toronto after having a kind of devastating blow of not getting into Yale and the School of Art Institute of Chicago. I decided to just be an artist in Toronto and join art collectives and be part of the scene and be generous and just be really involved. And I did a degree in 2003, between 2003 and 2005, at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, so NASCAD University. And that's where I did my MFA. And it was really at NASCAD where I guess I developed a real sense of bringing in a kind of socio-political content into my work. Conceptual art has a huge background there, so going in as a painter to a school that was really conceptually driven was tricky. I mean, there was a lot of people supporting painting, for sure, but there were divides, and there had been divides for decades at that school of, kind of people interested in form and material, and also content, but form and material driven as well. So it was really there, I think, that I learned to say, I want to make things that are about the society in which we live in, and I want to be okay with that. I want to be okay that, painting could speak to something that's difficult, as much as it could if I was to do some other kind of political performance work or something like that. So it was really where I guess, really grabbed some of my teeth and wanting to speak to more gripping subjects. So I made paintings for a long time, and I still think of these things in the room, these textile works, as paintings. But I made paintings for a really long time, and they were really about looking at the built environment, looking at the city as sort of one of the biggest human projects of the 20th century. And it was around 2016 where I started thinking about how, I guess, for a long time I was thinking about if we could think of a we, and I feel it's a very problematic thing to think of we, because there is no real universality. So when I say we, who am I actually including? So I do have a problem thinking about universal themes for myself. At the same time, I'm interested in things that are common, maybe things that a lot of us can talk about. That's what I loved about the built environment theme, because when I was making paintings that were about deconstruction and construction, demolition sites, things like that, earthquakes in China, people could come up to my paintings and say, oh, that's Sao Paulo, or that's happening in Australia, or that's happening in my small town in Ghana. So it felt like people had a way in. And for viewers to have a way into my work is really, really important, so that it doesn't become something so sort of obtuse, or too overly symbolic, or too overly abstract that it doesn't make sense. So that's important to me. But kind of going back to this sort of thinking in 2016, where I was thinking about, a lot of my work had been maybe, what are we looking at? If I could simplify my practice and say, what are we looking at? I felt at that time, and for a long period before that, we were going, the world is sort of gravitating towards urban life, and a lot of us were looking at demolition and construction, and bulldozers, and cranes dominating the skyline, and things like that, and that felt common. And so in 2016, I started thinking about, how are we looking? So it was a sort of conceptual shift in a way from what are we looking at to how are we looking. And I started really thinking about the fact that we're looking through screens a lot of the time. So it wasn't about going out in the world, as we're all with our phones, nearby, where is it? Where is it? Really thinking about that as almost like another kind of common, that there's a looking through screens. So there was a sort of shift in my practice from making paintings that were quite theatrical and quite about space and a modeled space and having these sort of structural and architectural components to making collage that became quite flat. And that was a formal choice to also say, I want to be talking about flatness because I'm trying to talk about sort of a screen space, something that has a lack of depth. And it troubled people looking at my work, I think, because they're kind of like, but I don't get it, because the richness of your work is that sort of tactility, that kind of playful architecture that looks like it could spill into the gallery. And so it was interesting to just stay with my own process of what I wanted to think about. So what I started doing in my work is just sort of infiltrating old paintings with collage, bits of collage, just to sort of resuscitate, in a way, paintings that maybe didn't make it, the ends of series, things that were lying around the studio, small works. And I would just sort of wonder and be curious, what would happen if I just tore a bit of this magazine that was hanging around in the studio and activated it in some way? And could I, as a painter, resolve this tension between sort of the paper element stuck to paint and the painted surface? And all the while kind of wondering what does it mean to even be infiltrating my own work in that way. But because my work was often about deconstruction and construction, collage as something that I could bring in, even though it was paper instead of making it with paint, felt like a familiar language, even though they were sort of different materially. So I just sort of embraced that process. And then I made this kind of a key painting. This was actually, I said this was 2016. This was when I was really realizing what I was doing. But I made this other painting in 2015, which was looking at the front cover of Frieze magazine. It was May 2015. And that was the current magazine at the time. And I decided to paint the cover of it. The reason why I painted the cover of it was because I was making these sort of collage works, like I was saying, going into old paintings and collaging those surfaces. It was the first time I decided to make a painting from scratch with collage. So I was looking at this cover of Frieze magazine. It was a sculpture by Jan Vo. And inside the magazine, it was talking about Luc Tuymans' reproduction battle against Katrin van Giel, the Belgian photographer. The reason why I was interested in that is because Katrin van Giel had accused Luc Tuymans, a Belgian painter, of painting from her specific portrait of a Belgian journalist. And given that I just started working with found imagery in my work, it's sort of, my Nazca conceptual artist in me said like, oh, it's kind of interesting to symbolically paint that cover, which was dealing with that as an important essay. So that started, I guess, a deeper inquiry into what collage might mean, what it might mean to allow little bits of found imagery to become the painted gesture in my work. So it sort of carried on, and every day I would just make more and more of these things until the collage almost took over the surface. And the works I was making were quite small, just quite modest, sort of little easel paintings. Until the paint became a really secondary element. It was sort of a torn up imagery, and then just painted parts in between, just whatever parts were left over, which was interesting for me as well. In 2016, I made the decision to start working with British Vogue as material, and that was mainly I guess there was a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one of the reasons. There's many reasons. One was just this idea of, if I stayed with that magazine for a period of time, what would happen? What could I learn from it? I'm not, particularly married to fashion or, the subject matter, and I wasn't an avid reader of the magazine. It was just this feeling of what would happen if I just stayed with it and kept looking at it and just kept working with this process of deconstructing the images from these magazines. British Vogue at that year had celebrated their centenary. That interested me, 100 years of publication. 100 years of a publication, like many publications, that has a very homogeneous representation of gender and race and sexuality. So that interested me as well, troubled me. And I wondered, what would it mean to deconstruct that? What would it mean to deconstruct that archive? As I started making these collages, and I kept making them, There was a period where I just wondered, going back to that thinking of the flatness, what would it be like if I scanned my work and then printed it? I don't know, that was just like it's just a thinking, I guess, another kind of translation. There seemed to be something about translation and deconstruction that was so interesting to me, so I just followed that through. And I did that, and I did a sort of inkjet print on canvas. And then, like any time when you do a print, I had these strips, you know, like a little strip of test where you say, like, are the blacks good, or the reds good? And you get these little strips. I started painting on the surface, I started cutting the surface up, I started doing stuff to it. I think because as a painter I wondered, is that enough to have this, like it's really flat now, you know? And it was interesting because you look at it and it's like, well, I'm making a photograph sort of my own work, but how could I, what's my relationship to it? I was just interested. So I took these strips, and being the ever studious person, I like taking courses. I decided to take a machine embroidery course. It was just like a freehand, sort of 2-hour, like Tuesday night freehand machine embroidery course at London Embroidery Studio. And I brought my little test strips, and I thought, I'm going to stitch into these. I don't know what's going to happen. So I did that, and there's so many wonderful threads there that you're like, oh God, I can pick any color, and this is great. I can just wondering about it. I hated the feeling of the needle puncturing that inkjet canvas. It was like, you know, just, I was like, you know, sort of like, gross. And also, the holes, you know, like IKEA furniture, when you nick it, you know, the holes made little white circles. Where it was quite, you know, quite minimal, but I was like, this is sort of ugly, you know. But at the same time, the thread and the color and the pop interested me. And the teacher said to me, this is Andy Kenny, who's now someone I work with, he was like, why don't you just print these as digital textiles? And I was just looking at him like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. It's like, is that digital? You know, like, is that digital? You know, I was just like, I don't even, oh my God, it didn't occur to me. Because I was never working in fiber arts or in textiles. So, of course, I tried it, you know. And it was so exciting to then have this material that was so soft and so malleable that I could cut up again and imagine. And when you're working with images of torn up bits of bodies and women, connecting it back in this way to working, you know, in textiles and connecting that with feminist art practice and labor that women have done for, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, felt really exciting and really good. So I basically married that process of printing them in textiles with the idea of embroidery. You know, so this work here, this small work, was sort of it's this piece that was made over such a long period of time because it was the first bit of linen that I had printed, and I did everything to it. You know, it was like that sketchbook, you know, where you're like, right, okay. So I could tell you the whole story, you know. This section is where I was just at my own machine learning how to do some machine embroidery. And then I got it stuck because I was terrible at doing machine embroidery, and it made holes and I had to swear. And then I was like, well, I love it because it's about deconstruction and that seems fitting. So it was about embracing, you know, the process and the learning. And then I took a course again with London Embroidery Studio with Andy Kenny again, learning about digital embroidery for 6 weeks. And so that was sort of mind-blowing because digital embroidery is like actually has its own software on the computer, and you literally can, in my case, I uploaded pictures of my own collage work because obviously I had already started to scan them, like I said before, and print them. So I had these lovely images of my own work. And the first thing I did was I looked at it and I was like, they're so complex, right? There's so much going on in them. What do I do? And digital embroidery, you're like with a mouse, like clicking. And at first it was almost like, am I paint by numbering my work? And like, you know, is that what I'm doing? Like, but I'm also just trying to learn digital embroidery. So it's like I'm trying to make art and at the same time learn. I should have done something really easy. You know, I should have just drawn a flower and not cared about the thing. But of course I'm like trying to push it for myself and my own practice. So what ended up happening is that I started teaching myself how I could think about how embroidery might be used in a way to embellish the work, to create, like, you know, the way a painter would paint the last whites of the eye, you know, to really bring out like a really beautiful other kind of white because of the cotton thread that you chose, or the white thread that, or the woolen threads, to look for sheen, to look at different kinds of tactility. I fell in love with their matte ceramic thread. I was like, how does the thread get covered in ceramic and still be thready? Just so wonderful, just being introduced to this whole other palette. And seeing, being in a wonderful place that works with like Louis Vuitton and Victoria Beckham, doing fantastic embroidery work for them. Like, they have so many wonderful equipments and threads. So when I look at their purple thread box, this is like, it's like a whole treasure trove of palettes. It's just, like I fell in love with paint. I fell in love with chalk pastels and using color. So it's really important to me. The language, the formal language is really important to me as well as, the conceptual. So this work also became quilted. So you can see the kind of traveling, I guess you could say, that I've done.
It's like a map.
As this was your first work, what would you say from that you brought to these larger works that as the experimentation continued and sort of developed?
Yeah, so I guess when I was working on this, it was all those questions of like marrying the medium, like what does it mean to use thread? And what does it do? Could it be a repair? Could it be an embellishment? Is it another kind of illusion? Is it, about pop, color popping? Is it about adding depth? Is it about adding to other histories? Like, I like giving symbolic value in my work to other kinds of material histories, so gesturing towards that. And I think when I came over to here, it became thinking more about what print also does to the image and for the image. Like, this was about making that material. And it just was what it was, because it was a sample, and it was like what I could afford to print. Because even just doing that and a piece of silk cost £100. And I didn't know if I'd even like it. It might have been, the blacks weren't right, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I get this piece that's not even color corrected the way I'd want to. So it was all a bit of a gamble, because you're sending it off, and then you're not there at the printer, sort of saying, ooh, we need to work on the file more, because it's just not that kind of operation. So when I worked on this, it was about enlarging the image and looking at how I could take, so this was like I said, the very first one, and this one was when I started thinking, what if I looked back into the archives? So in 2017, I made a whole series of collage works with 1977 British folk. And the reason why I did that is because it was sort of late 2016 when I was thinking about looking back into the archives, as maybe for some of the reasons I've already discussed. And when I went onto eBay just to see like how easy is it to get these magazines, how expensive are they, books get heavy. The first thing that was available was this like sort of decommissioned library version of July to December 1977 British Folk. So it was like a nice hardcover blue, library blue kind of book. And being it was the end of 2016 and 2017 was coming up, 40 years felt like an interesting time period to sort of play with. It was kind of random, but also fit. It was the year I was born. And as a feminist, I really feel, the autobiographical is important to acknowledge where you're coming from. Given that I was thinking about print and I was thinking about digital, I was interested in my own subjectivity as someone born in 77 and part of like this little mini generation of people who've lived almost equally with and without the internet. So thinking about those things was significant. We're nodding, yes we are. Yeah, exactly. Special. 5 years now, it'll be different. It's like, it's a moment. It's an interesting moment. So this particular work that you see here, this textile painting, is based on one collage from September 1st, 1977, British Folk. So it's fall colors. And when I did those, I did 16 works with those 1977 publications, because there were 16 published that year. A couple bumper crop issues, sort of like 2 published in September, 2 in October, 2 in March, and 2 in April. So I used to do it a little bit differently. That's why there's the 16. And I basically decided that I would start to use some of those to enlarge and blow them up. So that's where I'm getting to your question, where it sort of became about having done not all the work on this, not all the labor in that, but having started some of it. Printing this larger, wondering what enlargement would bring to the work in terms of, there was a part of me for a couple of years thinking like, this is really quite abstract work. The content, you know, the sort of semiotic sort of reference of magazines, I hope are there. But when you work quite abstractly and with a really busy composition, you don't really know what the viewer can see. Am I pushing it, the visuality, too much? So enlarging it felt like this way of bringing the subject matter in through the back door, where it would be like, oh, now we can see maybe some of these things. Maybe we can see that this is a bra strap and a finger. Whereas when it was quite small, it was sort of like a light area with the line and, you know, maybe a small gesture if you were looking really hard. So that interested me, the idea of enlargement, bringing forth the subject. Also, this idea of the halftone in the sort of late 70s printing, and that language, that print language of the dots that made up print at that time. And that being exacerbated by the scan and the enlargement. So when you look at sort of here, you see all these like dots that make up the imagery. I like that language is creeping in farther. When I was working with the digital designer, she was talking to me about, do I want to perfect the image? Like, because the scanner obviously can really sort of interpolate the image and take away all the little tiny fibers and all those things. And I said, no, I actually want it to be a forensic image. So it was really about allowing all those things to be part of it. So when I make a work like this, I'll print 2 copies of the full image. And then I'll cut it in half. And one becomes, in a way, like the base or the background. And then the other part becomes something that I can play with. So I can make these bits of applique and repeat, say, that image over here, using maybe other lines that replicate the lines. And then I can add these, stitching elements and doubling. I can create a hole and then fill the hole with the same image. So there's sort of more language of like repair or destruction, sort of both, I guess. My work's always been about construction and destruction, or construction and deconstruction, building and unbuilding.
And there's a big difference between your small work over there and this one, in the sense that this one is what they call very formed. You know, you finish the edging and it's very fitted. I mean, what led you to leaving this one being more sort of frayed, or you know, sort of more open to it?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. Because when I started making these, when you're sort of using different languages, different processes in different languages, something I'm familiar with because I can kind of build images with any kind of material. But this idea of, I finished the thing, but now it's not resolved, because textiles become like, how do you hang it? How do you finish the edges? What does that do to it? Will it become like a quilt? And actually the first thing I was going to do to this was quilt it. I was like, oh, I love the idea of traveling over all of these. I like the idea of the illusion of the picture of the rip and then the real rip and the stitch line and all of that mirroring each other. And as I started making the surface, because if you ever work in quilting, if you ever want to do any kind of surface work, you do that first, because that's your surface. If you want to do applique, you do that first. Because otherwise you're going to embed it all. It's all going to be like that. And you've lost the opportunity to sort of create surface. So basically I decided, okay, I'll do the surface. And there was so much work that I was like, do I have to do more? Because literally, is it necessary to also quilt this? What will it mean? And I'm working on this with my little domestic sewing machine in the studio. So whenever I'm doing anything, it's like, oh, I'm sewing, and then I'm like hanging this big thing, and then I come back, and I'm like, what if I go, yeah, that doesn't work. And then you're suddenly like, unpick, which you can, which is awesome, but it's a pain. Especially when you're not like a superstar sewer and some stitches are tight, right? But it was sort of this decision of talking to a friend who I studied with called Mackenzie Frere, who teaches at the Alberta College of Art and Design, calling him, he's a textile artist who works in weaving, and I was like, Mackenzie, how do you resolve edges? Like, what do I do? Is there like a contemporary, textile edging situation that I can just, refer to? He's like, we have this problem every month. Like, basically, this is a discussion we talk about all the time, because it does change things. It can really frame something. It can really make it part of craft somehow. There's a lot of language there.
Very evident in these two, in that exact conversation.
Yeah. And it was wondering, like, how far do I want to participate in that dialogue, and where can I sit? So that part's really kind of ongoing experiment. So I got a Canada Council grant last year to be able to work with Andy Kenny on like 8 large works like this, so making more textile paintings. So I think every one that I do will teach me something else about what does it need to be. For this one, it really felt like I had this moment where I was just using one of these samples and I was just tearing apart the image, and I loved how, because the digital image sits on top of the textile, when I was fraying it, I loved how it was deconstructing the image. And I was like, oh, that's quite nice. It's quite nice that the weave of the linen can be taken apart and leave a kind of little after image. And that's where I resolved the edging here, where I was just like, okay, I don't feel comfortable enough with it to just say, I'm gonna wrap it and I'm gonna stitch it and just finish that off. It just felt like I could do this frame and then see how that is. I could live with that for a while and see how that works, because I can always sew it, fold it into it and sew it again. But for this work, I feel like it's resolved in that way.
I think can I just ask, how long does it take you? You don't normally ask that question, but it's one of those situations where it's like, wow, it feels like there's a lot of work that goes into it. How long does it take to do, how long does it take to do that piece?
Well, it's an interesting one too, because it's been such a process. When I started making the collages, I wasn't like, oh, and then I'll cleverly print them and become, infiltrate these other materials. It wasn't like that. It was just like, I'll make collages, and then it was about just being kind of infinitely curious and attuned to, I guess, the approach. So when I make a collage on canvas, it usually takes me a day or two, because it's a very intense day, because I'm taking like one magazine issue and I'm going through it and I'm taking like the nape of the neck, the lips, behind the ears, bits of material that feel like they could be quite ambiguous. Like, I don't usually choose like a photograph of like knitwear, because it looks like a photograph of knitwear. I try to keep like billowy, non-pattern stuff, which in the 70s just loads of it, because there's lots of black and white photography. That's why you see lots of black and white. So it's kind of nice and simple to work with. So I'll do the kind of collage painting for sort of a day and a half, and then I'll scan it, and that can take, depends on the image, that can take 5 or 6 hours with the digital designer, because you're scanning it and then you're going through and saying, well, what is there? Bits of orange light that showed off on the image because the scanner, emitted light onto the surface of the collage and bounced back, and now we have to correct that. There's a lot of meticulous stuff there. And then it's about sending it off, to a textiles, silk bureau to do the textiles. And then it's coming back to me in the studio to work in further. So when I think of it that way, I'm like, wow, so then it becomes a couple weeks, I guess. But really, it was like a year and a half, because everything isn't quite like that. I was saying to someone the other day, they're asking like how it took me a year to make those 16 collage paintings, those 1977. And it's like, well, why would it take you a year when it's only 16 works that only take a day or two? But there's so much other stuff that happens in between. There's other paintings or works that get made. There's drawings that get made. There's sitting there worrying, this isn't gonna work. There's trying to go for a run and clearing your head. There's family stuff. There's like, oh, I'm so excited, I need to make 3 of those exact ones, and then I'll choose one. So there's just a lot of different kinds of work, I guess, that don't always get talked about. Yeah.
It takes a lot just to have that final image hanging on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when I've spoken to you in the past, you've talked about the sort of haptic quality to the work and the sort of tactile nature, which relates to your painting practice as well as is quite distinct. And what was that like with that sort of haptic quality?
Yeah, I was trying to think of that for so long, and I keep thinking now it's like the visual haptic, if that can be like hyphened. It's what I'm interested in. I guess because painting always had touch. Although I'm not sure everyone thinks of touch when they think of painting. I think people often think of talent somehow, or beauty, or it depends on the kind of painting it is, right? Some paintings are all about touch, and it's really, really on the cuff, and others aren't. But Will Gorlitz is a really good Canadian painter, and he said this really beautiful thing after, he did a painting quite a few years after his wife died, and he talked about trying to make a painting through tears. And it was it just changed the way I thought of painting. You know, it was like that painting could be something that you created because of how you're seeing something. So beautiful, right? I know, just so beautiful. You know, just this other way of like, oh wow, that's like a painter trying to express what they're doing. You know, it was so poignant. And so this idea of like the haptic quality. I was in a show called The Haptic that was the first biennial I'd ever been in Kitchener-Waterloo Biennial. I'm trying to remember when this was. 2007, so a little while ago. And the theme that they wanted to talk about was haptic. It was all about touch. I was the only painter. Because it's a weird thing, you know, people are like, well, how is a painter going to talk about touch? It's like, painting is made of touches. That's what it's made of. It's like touch over touch over touch over touch over touch. You know, unless you're Andy Warhol and you say, I don't want it to be touched. But, you know, so the quality of touch is something that's very important to me, and the making of it. But my work's always been quite explicitly visual, you know, really kind of expressively, kind of theatrically visual, something I'm interested in, something of like an all-at-onceness, cubism, abstract expressionism. I'm interested in that. I'm kind of interested in abstraction with content. That's kind of what I'm really interested in. But like to have a work that could speak to touch or the haptic, like we're touching images, like we're looking, so that there's more senses happening at once, and that's on the cuff of the work means a lot. I feel like I can get that through textiles more readily than through painting, because I feel like people go, oh, it's textiles, you know, it's like there's something softer about it. There's something like a softer history, or like, oh, I get it somehow. And I like that aspect too, that it feels like it's not part of a kind of elitist.
Can you talk a bit more about that? Because when I see this work, and I think of abstract expressionists, like big, colorful paintings, and somewhat sexy with the female form. But I think of male painters.
This.
And then I see that it's fabric, and there's embroidery, and there's textiles and touch, and I know I'm generalizing, saying that's male, that's female, but just can you talk about that relationship a bit more?
It's something that's always been somewhere in the background. So there was a really fantastic textiles tutor. And I'm so sorry, I can't remember her name at the moment. She's amazing, and she was at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design forever. I didn't spend any time in that department, so hopefully I'm forgiven for not actually remembering her name. But I did know Mackenzie, the guy, called and said, hey, how do we resolve the edges of textiles? So he's a very good friend of mine, and when we were doing our MFA together, he came into my studio 2 days after my MFA show opened. So I made this show called The Pink House. And it was a show that detailed over a 9-month period, the paintings were made over a 9-month period, the demolition of a pink house that had been abandoned for over 30 years in a kind of very marginalized north end part of Halifax that had a very difficult and complicated history, this area. There's 13 other abandoned houses on that road, but this little pink house was one that people seem to remember. And it interested me as well, because when I first saw it, the whole back had been torn off, like a dollhouse. So it was like the dollhouse I played in as a child, and it was this, you know, this real like enigmatic, what is this place? What happens there? How come it just sometimes just gets boarded up more? Who's doing that? You know, who's sort of building this, and I'm building it. So I made this show about that house being demolished, one of which was a 6-meter painting of the demolition of that house. Huge painting. And this textile tutor came in to see the show, and she told Mackenzie, oh, I love it! I love this macho painting so much. I love this man. Who is this awesome male MFA with all this bravado. It's awesome. She was just like, like a little Japanese woman. And he comes in and he's telling me this, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then it kind of happened sort of more, here and there over the years of like taking this on. And I wonder somehow, I'm trying to think of, was it Angela Davis who said one of the problems with feminism, in terms of especially in terms of whiteness, was that a lot of white feminists don't understand because they're trying to live up to their fathers, or they're measuring up to their fathers. And so there is a part of me, that has been about taking on these big painters, that I was taught about, that I fell in love with at age 12 or 14, or like when I went to the first crush I ever had on a sort of modern painter was Hans Hofmann. I remember going, when the Guggenheim Bilbao opened, I don't know if it was 97, but I was there in 98. And I went there to see this incredible new museum, because I'd been to the one in New York. And I remember sitting and staring at this Hans Hofmann painting forever, just wondering about color and form and this energy and the layers and all of these things. So I don't know. I think that is there, whether I want it to be or not. That sort of exuberant, theatrical, dynamic, attention-grabbing stuff. But you've met me too. So. There is something about the personality. I've had a lot of big women personalities also in my life that have been about taking up space. It has been about being the loudest person in the room and being told ugh. I was told all the time that I was too loud when I was a little kid.
So I sympathize.
Yeah, well, my teacher would say Ehryn, and they'd bring, he'd make me come over, and I'd be like, everyone was talking, and he'd be like, yours is the voice that I heard. And you're kind of man, I don't know.
So how do you feel about using the techniques that you're talking about going forward now, the 8 that you're creating?
I feel infinitely inspired by it. The making these collages, even though in a way the practice, it started becoming there's a sort of aesthetic I've developed somehow, there's a process. I'm looking through the magazine, I'm tearing out bits. But every time I make one, I'm kind of it's new, because it is new, because the material's different. Because it's not, it's the same process, but totally different images every time. And it's very much about improvisation. It's like jazz. It's just I'm tearing it out, and I don't know. I always wonder if people can tell this. I'm using my thumb all the time, tearing out these images. So I'm literally just holding down the page and tearing it out. So there's lots of these sort of roundy shapes over and 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 over again, which sort of work, I guess, because there's a lot of folds, because there's body parts. But it's made physically by bodies. There's no I'm gonna cut it and then cleverly, I don't edit anything. It's literally this, and then I'll make do, and it's about making do and building. What I'm also really interested in is working, more with Andy, of giving over. So there's another work that I've made where he's, Andy Kenny, who I was working with in the London Embroidery Studio, where I actually gave over the textile, and I said, could you sort of do your thing on this, picking up on bits of imagery and embroidery. So he's made really large sections of digital embroidery, sometimes that act like trompe-l'oeil. So he'll take an area that's the paint, these are the painted areas that are blown up, and now it's a photo of painting. He'll make a little almost beehive-like weave texture on the other works that look even more like the painted structure, and that's really fun and playful. So to de-center myself in terms of authorship is really interesting to me, and having even more people involved. So working in performance is something that I'm starting to develop. So part of my grant is to actually work with a dancer choreographer who I unfortunately had lost the partner that I was going to be working with in the fall, but I've been doing my bit of getting involved and interested in the dance and performance community in London. So I've been going to Siobhan Davies' dance, and I took a class in choreography and improvisation, which is really exciting. And just meeting lots of new people where I can give over a section of textiles, and a group of, I hope, women will, I hope very diverse intergenerational women will become a kind of author of the material. So I'm going to be printing in silk, and together we'll make possibly costumes or anything. It could be anything. It could, it could be background. It could be things that it could be all torn up and turned into shreds. It could become garments. But that's something that's happening next as a kind of other decentering removal of myself as a sort of sole author of the process and the thinking behind what images are, or how are women represented, who's not represented. So it can be participatory. Yeah.
Do you now make a connection between painting on canvas and that as a form of textile and your textile?
Definitely.
Is it something you might explore explicitly?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you think, how many painters really think about that surface? I mean, you think about surface, you think about maybe prime it, and there's things you do to it, but do you really acknowledge that that's textile? So one of the reasons when I started printing in linen and silk was to really make that choice of painting painting substrates, and their sort of long histories. Silk especially with trade routes and all of these histories of labor and money being made off people making these things, and that's symbolically and politically quite important to me as well. So there was a real direct decision to sort of connect the painting practice with painting substrates and what those materials and gestures might mean.
I think there are, I'm not an expert, but I think there are traditions also of painting on silk.
Yeah, especially in China.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I was really thinking about those, because cotton is sort of a new painting material in those terms, anyways. More of a modern material to paint on. So, yeah. Never really painted on linen before, though, I have to say. Well, I have, but I know, never. Yeah, just the whole stretching it and the warping and the. Can't do that. I also work in acrylic. Sorry.
I think there's a relation, obviously, with the tapestry and the tradition of the tapestry in your work too. Obviously, there's a kind of strong correlation with the scale and how it's kind of hung on the wall.
Yeah, definitely.
I wonder if this is 1977 and the color palette and the textures from that year. Have you thought about what would 1987 look like? 1997.
Yeah.
How would it evolve?
Yeah, there's a part of me that loves really literal stuff, where they're just I like that. And I don't want to say anything else. It's well, that's why I made it in 2017. I don't know. It's sort of felt like enough. But there's a lot of things that I'll do that I'll be oh, that's kind of cheesy, but at the same time, oh well, just let's see what happens. But yeah, it does kind of interest me to wonder what are the wider applications. So don't tell anyone because I might not get it. But I did apply for a residency, and it's in Canada, and I was thinking about Chatelaine magazine, which is a specifically Canadian magazine that started in the.
What's it called?
Chatelaine. Chatelaine. So it was Maclean's magazine who basically decided, we're missing the women's market, right? So we should make a women's magazine, and they even put out a call that said will our potential readers name it? And Chatelaine was chosen. And I might, forgive me, French speakers, but is it not the keys that go to the house? It's the caretaking of the keys to the house. So there's a real domestic sort of hosting kind of luxury, middle class kind of thing going on in terms of who decided what the name was. But there was quite a lot of really interesting and evocative things done by one of the editors who became editor in the, I'm trying to remember, 50s, I think, but she was the editor for sort of 20 or 25 years. So a real interesting Canadian feminist who was the first female editor of the female magazine and never got a job anywhere else. Maclean's has still never had a female editor, basically, and it's 130 years of publishing. But I was interested in sort of what would it look like to make some collages out of, say, I'm not going to say the right years, but I'm just using it as an example. Say 1962, when Chatelaine magazine decided to talk about abortion rights at a time when no other media was talking about it, and especially not being pro-abortion. And some of these feminist issues that they were trying to present amongst, how to make cocktails and how to clean your house and how to be a good host. And I just sort of wonder, what would it be like to make a magazine out of that? Because of course you've got those sort of editorials. I'm not going to, the collage isn't going to speak to that content exactly, but it's going to be a part of like the witness of what other advertisements was in that magazine. Who was being advertised? Who were they trying to include in part of this conversation? Who was not part of the conversation? So I know I'm kind of interested in some of those like
it's a kind of sense
applications. Yeah. I've never told anyone that, so you're all, thank you. Some brand new stuff in the pipes.
Does anyone have any more questions? Well, I think this is a good moment to say thank you very much for a wonderfully informative talk. And I hope everyone has enjoyed themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Please ask me any questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you just